My children told me to pack my best dresses for a family vacation. What they meant was that they had already planned my funeral. Those words have lived in my chest ever since, heavy as stone, bitter as ash. At the time, of course, I didn't know. All I felt was the warmth of recognition I had been craving for so long. When they stood in my kitchen, smiling, telling me to dust off my suitcase and get ready for something special, I thought it was finally my turn. After decades of sacrifices, of putting their happiness before my own, they were at last turning toward me with gratitude. I was 74, a widow with more memories than plans, and I thought they had remembered that I too was still alive. I remember the way my daughter clasped her hands together as if she could barely contain her excitement, her voice lilting, "Mom, you deserve this." I nearly wept right there. I had spent years watching other families take their parents to the beach, to the mountains, to places where laughter floated in the air. My vacations had always been in the form of letters to pay, meals to cook, and grandchildren to babysit. That evening, as I folded the silk scarf my late husband had once given me, I thought to myself, maybe this is how love circles back. Maybe my season of sacrifice had ripened into their season of gratitude. I pulled my best dresses from the back of the closet, smoothing out the wrinkles with careful hands. In my mind, I was already standing on a shoreline, the breeze lifting my hair while my grandchildren's small hands reached for mine. I imagined their laughter as we collected shells, the sun painting golden streaks on our faces. I imagined dinners where my children raised glasses to me, not because I had cooked, but because I was finally the guest of honor. The thought lit something deep inside me that I hadn't felt in years. A flicker of being cherished, of belonging. And yet there was something in their smiles I couldn't quite name. Too fixed, too rehearsed, as if they were actors in a play they didn't fully believe in. My son's hand trembled slightly as he lifted my suitcase from the attic, muttering that I wouldn't need too much. I brushed it off as excitement. But later, when I noticed that none of them seemed to be packing, I paused. "Where are your bags?" I asked lightly, almost joking. My daughter laughed, too quickly. "Oh, don't worry about that, Mom. We'll sort everything." Then she changed the subject, pressing me about whether I'd packed sunscreen. I wanted to believe her laughter was real. I wanted to believe so badly that I smoothed over the unease like one presses wrinkles out of a sheet. The night before we were to leave, I sat at the edge of my bed, staring at the open suitcase. Inside were dresses that carried pieces of my history. The pale blue one I wore to my husband's retirement party, the floral print my granddaughter once told me made me look like spring. Each piece was more than fabric. It was a memory stitched into me. I told myself that this trip would create new memories, ones that finally placed me in the center instead of the shadows. Still, there was a whisper in the back of my mind, faint but persistent. Why now? Why this sudden urgency, this insistence that I must be ready without delay? I had lived long enough to recognize that love usually grows slow and steady, not rushed and breathless. Yet I silenced my doubt, choosing instead to wrap myself in hope. What harm could come from believing my children loved me enough to do something kind? Hope, after all, is the last thing we give up, even when reason starts tugging at the threads. On the morning we left, I noticed again the strangeness. My son hurried me to the car before I could even lock the back door, assuring me he'd taken care of it. My daughter squeezed my hand a little too tightly, her eyes darting away as if she were afraid of being caught in a lie. Still, I told myself to be grateful. I told myself not to spoil the moment with suspicion. I was going on vacation, wasn't I? The truth is, I clung to the fantasy because the alternative was too dark to even imagine. A parent spends their life believing their children will carry their love forward, that the hands they raised in tenderness will return one day to lift them up. To consider anything else felt like tearing open the very fabric of my identity as a mother. So I smiled. I smiled as they ushered me into the back seat, as they loaded only my suitcase, as they exchanged glances I pretended not to see. I smiled because if I stopped, the questions would come rushing in and I wasn't ready for their answers. But deep down, beneath the layers of denial and longing, something inside me already knew. Love can be blind, but it isn't stupid. We feel when something is off even if we can't name it. I felt it then, a chill under the warmth of their promises, a shadow in the light of their smiles. I didn't know yet that what they offered me wasn't a vacation but an ending. All I knew was that hope is fragile and mine was about to shatter. The morning air felt lighter than it had in weeks, and as I settled into the back seat of the car, I told myself to breathe it in, to savor the beginning of what I thought was going to be a journey toward joy. My daughter sat beside me, fussing over the shawl draped across my shoulders, while my son slid into the driver's seat with a strange urgency. For a moment, I allowed myself to feel like a queen being escorted to a long-awaited coronation. But the illusion didn't last. The first twist of the road told me something was wrong. We didn't head toward the familiar highway that led to the airport. Instead, the car slipped into narrower roads, bending into stretches of countryside I didn't recognize. My heart pricked with unease. I leaned forward slightly, peering out the window at landscapes that looked nothing like the bustling city routes I expected. Farms blurred past, fields stretching endlessly, and with each mile, the image I had carried of palm trees and oceans grew fainter. "Are we taking a shortcut?" I asked gently, trying to keep my voice light. For a second, silence filled the car. Then my son cleared his throat. "Something like that, Mom. Don't worry." His hands gripped the steering wheel tighter, the knuckles pale as if the road itself carried secrets he was determined to keep from me. My daughter turned her face toward the window, humming softly, avoiding my gaze. That was when I noticed it. No bags. No neatly stacked suitcases in the trunk. No beach toys for the children. No second or third set of luggage for a family supposedly going away. Only mine, the carefully packed dresses and memories stuffed into a single case, sat in the back. A hollow sensation opened in my stomach, a drop as sudden as missing a step on the stairs. I pressed again, my voice slightly firmer this time. "Where are your things? Did you pack later?" I didn't see. My daughter cut me off with a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Relax, Mom. Everything is taken care of." Then she reached for the radio, turning up the volume as if to drown out not just my questions but also her own guilt. It was then that I caught the whisper. My son leaned slightly toward her, his voice low, sharp as a knife meant to stay hidden. "The doctor said it will look natural." The words landed like a blow, and though I wasn't supposed to hear them, they sank deep into my chest. Natural? What was supposed to look natural? I sat frozen, my fingers clutching the shawl, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain they could hear it. I turned my face toward the window, pretending to be lost in the scenery while inside my mind reeled. The doctor. Which doctor? My mind scrambled through the months behind me, replaying conversations I had dismissed, jokes that now felt too sharp, questions about my health that had seemed innocent at the time. My son asking about my medications, just to be sure. My daughter insisting I see her friend's physician for a wellness check. There's sudden, strange urgency in making me write down passwords, bank account numbers, and the details of my insurance. At the time, I had told myself it was love disguised as nagging. But maybe it had been preparation. I shifted slightly in my seat, willing my breathing to slow. They thought I was fragile. They thought I couldn't hear, couldn't see the puzzle pieces forming. But I saw enough to know that paradise wasn't waiting at the end of this road. Something else was. Something final. My mind darted back to every time I had excused their behavior, every red flag I had smoothed over with hope. I remembered the way they joked about my nest egg, laughing about how I'd outlived Dad and how I was their golden ticket. I remembered the way their tone sharpened whenever the topic of my health came up, how they pushed supplements into my hands, asking if I felt tired more than usual. I had smiled through it all, thinking it was care. But sitting there with their whispers still echoing, I realized it had been calculation. I felt a shiver crawl up my spine. Execution. That was the word my mind clung to, though it seemed too grotesque to apply to the children I had raised. And yet what else could it be? Why no luggage of their own? Why no familiar roads, no laughter, no anticipation in their eyes? They weren't taking me somewhere to live. They were taking me somewhere to die. I turned my face slightly toward them, watching as they pretended everything was normal. My son's jaw clenched as he focused on the road, my daughter forcing a melody under her breath. And in that moment I wondered, how long had they been planning this? Was it weeks? Months? Years? Had every "Mom, we worry about you" been a rehearsal for this journey? I pressed my palm against the window, cool glass grounding me as my pulse raced. The betrayal was so sharp it almost took my breath away. To think that the very people I had carried in my body, fed at my table, protected against the world, could plot my undoing. It was a wound deeper than death itself. For what? Money? Convenience? Freedom from the burden of my existence? 1,000 memories collided in my mind. My son as a boy running toward me with scraped knees, crying for comfort. My daughter curling into my arms during thunderstorms, whispering she felt safe with me. I had given them everything. And now, in return, they offered me silence, whispers, and roads that bent away from everything familiar. I told myself not to panic. Panic would give me away. Instead, I leaned back, closing my eyes as if the ride had lulled me into sleep. But inside, every nerve in my body was on fire, every instinct screaming that this was not the journey I had imagined. It was the beginning of an ending they wanted to write for me. I didn't know where the road was leading, but I knew one thing with certainty. It wasn't to the airport and it wasn't to paradise. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing slow and steady, as if the rhythm of the car had lulled me into sleep. In truth, every muscle in my body was wired with tension, every sense straining for clues. The road hummed beneath the tires, winding further away from the world I knew. But inside my purse, beneath the folded shawl and an old rosary, was something I had nearly forgotten. A gift from a friend so dear, it felt as though she were reaching across time to save me. Years ago, before arthritis slowed my steps, I had coffee every Wednesday with Helen, a woman who had known me since we were girls. She was practical, shrewd, the sort of friend who always had a plan for emergencies. One afternoon she handed me a tiny phone no bigger than a pack of mints. "Just in case," she said with a knowing look. "You never know when you might need to call someone without anyone else knowing." I had laughed then, tucking it away in my purse and forgetting about it. After all, what danger could an old woman like me expect? Life, I believed, had already thrown its worst at me when it took my husband. But Helen always saw further than the rest of us. And now, on this road that bent toward betrayal, her foresight became my lifeline. Slowly, while the car bumped along, I shifted my hand into my purse, my movements deliberate, patient. I felt the familiar leather of my wallet, the edge of a tissue packet, then finally the cool plastic casing of the phone. My heart hammered so loudly I feared my children would hear it. With careful fingers I pulled it free, hidden beneath the folds of the shawl across my lap. I cracked one eye open. My daughter was staring out the window, humming again, though her voice wavered like a thread about to snap. My son's gaze stayed locked on the road, his jaw set, hands gripping the wheel. Neither looked back. I unlocked the tiny device, my thumbs stiff but determined. The screen lit up faintly, and for a second I nearly cried with relief. It still worked. Helen had set it up with only a few contacts: herself, the police station, and my lawyer, Mr. Callahan, a man who had handled my affairs for years. I chose him. He was steady, meticulous, and above all, he believed me when others didn't. With trembling fingers I typed, *urgent. My children are taking me somewhere against my will. Not airport. Countryside. Please help. Sharing location now. I pressed send, praying that the signal reached through the lonely fields rolling past us. My pulse raced as I waited, the silence stretching like a noose. What if it didn't go through? What if this little device failed me now at the one moment I needed it most? Then the vibration. A message blinked across the small screen. Received. Stay calm. I'm tracking your location. Authorities alerted. Don't let them know. I closed my eyes again, gripping the phone tightly in my palm. For the first time since this nightmare began, a flicker of strength stirred inside me. I was not entirely alone. Someone outside this car knew the truth. Someone was on their way. And as I sat there pretending to doze, a new thought sharpened in my mind. My children had underestimated me. They had assumed that age meant blindness, that loyalty meant ignorance, that motherhood meant surrender. They thought I would never see through their smiles, never question the missing luggage, never catch the whisper about a doctor. They thought I was soft clay, easy to shape, too weak to resist. But they were wrong. What they didn't understand was that years of sacrifice don't erase wisdom. A woman who has survived widowhood, who has stretched pennies into meals, who has held the weight of others' lives on her shoulders, does not collapse easily. I had been their comfort, their shield, their provider. Now I would become my own. Still, fear and strength mingled in me like oil and water. Every turn of the car deepened the dread clawing at my chest. Where were they taking me? What plan had they agreed upon with that so-called doctor? And most haunting of all, how long had they looked at me not as their mother but as an obstacle, a calculation on a ledger sheet? I remembered all the times I had ignored my instincts. My son joking too often about when the house becomes ours. My daughter insisting I sign papers I hadn't fully read, brushing off my questions with a laugh. The whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when I entered the room. I had excused them all because the alternative, that my own children saw me as disposable, was too heavy to accept. Now the weight of that denial pressed down on me. But alongside the ache was something else. Defiance. They believed they were writing the end of my story, but I had just handed the pen to someone else. My lawyer, the authorities, fate itself. Anyone but them. My life wasn't theirs to steal. I shifted slightly in my seat, tucking the phone deeper beneath the shawl. My daughter glanced at me, her expression soft, almost pitying. "Tired, Mom?" she asked. I forced a faint smile, nodding, letting her believe I was fading, weakening. Inside my thoughts burned brighter than ever. Let them think I was drifting. Let them think I had surrendered. The truth was I was waiting. Waiting for sirens, for flashing lights, for justice to arrive. Waiting for the moment when their whispers would turn into stammers, when their confidence would rot into fear. They had forgotten who raised them, who taught them to navigate a world that often conspired against the vulnerable. They had forgotten that even the frailest bird fights hardest when its nest is threatened. The car wound deeper into the countryside, the fields swallowing the horizon, the silence broken only by the engine's low hum. I kept my eyes closed, my breathing steady, my phone hidden, my hope alive. They thought they had me cornered, but I had already begun to turn their plot into their undoing. For the first time in years I felt not just fear but purpose. If I survived this, and I believed now that I would not only save myself. I would expose them. I would make sure the world saw what they tried to do. And perhaps that was the truest revenge. Not a fight, not a scream, but survival itself, witnessed and undeniable. The car slowed as gravel crunched under the tires, jolting me from the rhythm of feigned sleep. My eyes fluttered open, and the first thing I noticed was the absence of sea air. No gulls crying overhead, no scent of salt carried on the wind. Instead, tall trees pressed in on either side of a narrow road, their branches clawing at the sky like skeletal fingers. When the car stopped, I looked out the window and felt the last illusion crumble. It wasn't a seaside resort. It wasn't even close. Before us stood a building long, white, and eerily sterile, tucked deep into the countryside. Its facade was glass and steel, coldly modern but not inviting. Above the entrance, a polished sign read Haven Wellness Retreat. The words shimmered as if offering safety, but to my eyes they looked like a mask stretched too thin over something sinister. My son turned to me with a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "We're here, Mom," he said brightly, like a man unveiling a surprise. My daughter reached for my hand, squeezing it with exaggerated tenderness, as though she were guiding me toward paradise. Their warmth was rehearsed, their gestures too precise. For the first time in my life, I felt like a prop in my own children's theater. I forced a weak smile, nodding as if confused, letting my shoulders slump. "It's beautiful," I murmured, though every nerve in my body screamed the opposite. The truth pressed against my chest like a locked door. This was no place of healing. This was where they planned to end me. The glass doors hissed open, and inside stood two women in white uniforms. Their smiles were wide, practiced, the kind that showed teeth but no warmth. "Welcome, Mrs. Linton," one of them said smoothly, her voice honeyed yet hollow. My name on her lips felt unnatural, as though she had rehearsed it a dozen times before my arrival. "We've been expecting you." Expecting me. My heart stumbled at those words. How long had my children been arranging this? How many conversations had been held behind my back, how many contracts signed, how many lies spun into silk smiles? The women stepped forward, one placing a hand on my arm, the other taking my bag with a rehearsed gentleness. "You'll be very comfortable here," she continued. Comfortable. The word chilled me. Comfortable was what people said when they meant docile, compliant, ready to fade without protest. My children flanked me as though guiding me into paradise. "Come on, Mom," my daughter coaxed, her voice sing-song sweet. I let my steps falter, leaning slightly into her hold, masking my strength beneath an act of fragility. If this was their performance, I would play my role too, but on my terms. Inside, the air was cool, sterile, carrying no scent of life, only antiseptic, faintly chemical. The walls gleamed with an emptiness that echoed. No pictures of happy families, no signs of laughter or warmth. Just long, white corridors stretching into silence. My chest tightened with the suffocating realization. This was not a retreat. This was a stage for a carefully orchestrated death. The staff spoke in tones too smooth, their movements synchronized as though trained to reassure while concealing something darker. "This way, Mrs. Linton," one said, gesturing down the corridor. "We'll get you settled right away." Settled. Another word that masked its true meaning. Settled like a debt, like a burden put to rest. I glanced at my son. His eyes flickered with calculation as he adjusted his jacket. My daughter, still holding my hand, avoided my gaze, her smile stretched thin. They thought I didn't see it. The way their eyes darted, the relief that shimmered beneath their false concern. They thought their mother was blind, too old to recognize betrayal written across their faces. But I saw it. And I would remember it. We passed a lounge where muted music drifted from hidden speakers. A handful of elderly people sat slumped in armchairs, their eyes glazed, their bodies listless. Attendants hovered nearby, smiling too brightly, adjusting pillows that didn't need adjusting, pouring water into glasses that sat untouched. My throat tightened. These weren't guests. They were captives disguised as patients, fading quietly while the world believed they were cared for. My children continued to play their part, my son chatting about how peaceful the place looked, my daughter marveling at how professional the staff seemed. Their voices dripped with artificial admiration as though the performance might convince me, or perhaps themselves, that this wasn't what it was. I nodded, offering a faint smile, eyes wide with feigned confusion. "It's nice," I whispered, my voice trembling just enough to sound frail. Inside, though, my mind sharpened. Every step we took deeper into that place, every false smile cast my way, every hand that guided me gently yet firmly toward confinement, I tucked away like ammunition. They believed I was weak. They believed my age had dulled my instincts. But they didn't know the phone hidden beneath my shawl, the message already sent, the help already on its way. Still, fear clawed at me. What if no one came in time? What if my message disappeared into the void, my lawyer's promise too slow to outpace my children's plan? I forced myself to breathe evenly, to remember Helen's voice when she pressed the little phone into my hand, just in case. She had known there would be a moment like this, though neither of us could have named it then. We stopped at a room. The door swung open to reveal a narrow bed, white sheets tucked too tightly, a chair beside it, a small table with a pitcher of water. No windows. My chest constricted. No windows meant no witness, no escape, no proof of the outside world. Just walls that could swallow a person whole and silence that could erase them. "This will be your space," the attendant chirped, her smile never wavering. My daughter brushed my hair back, her fingers trembling just slightly. "You'll be safe here, Mom." Safe. Another word twisted into a lie. I lowered myself onto the bed slowly, hands trembling as though exhausted. I let them believe I was succumbing, let them believe the walls had closed around me. But inside I repeated to myself, "Not yet. This isn't the end. I will not give them the satisfaction of watching me fade." I smiled faintly, my lips barely lifting. "Thank you," I whispered, my voice barely audible, letting them mistake performance for surrender. They couldn't see the fire burning behind my eyes, the determination coiled tight, waiting. They thought they had delivered me to my grave. But what they didn't know was that the outside world already knew where I was, and the walls they thought would hide their crime might soon become the walls of their undoing. The walls seemed to close in as I lay on that narrow bed, the sterile air pressing against my lungs. My children stood near the doorway, whispering to the staff, their smiles tight with anticipation. They thought their performance was complete, that the curtains were about to fall on me. Then it happened. At first, a faint wail, distant enough that it might have been the wind. But it grew, swelling until the sound pressed against the glass doors of the building, shattering the rehearsed calm of the place. Sirens. Long, rising cries that cut through the silence like knives. The attendants froze, their faces paled despite their painted smiles. My son's jaw tightened, his hand twitching as if to pull me from the bed and drag me away before the sound grew closer. My daughter looked toward the entrance, panic flashing across her carefully controlled expression. The wail of sirens multiplied, overlapping in waves until headlights blazed through the trees. Tires screeched against gravel, doors slammed, and heavy boots thundered across the ground. Voices, sharp, commanding, undeniable, filled the corridors. Police. Everyone stay where you are. The illusion shattered in an instant. The wellness retreat's mask crumbled, its polished surface unable to withstand the flood of authority. Officers stormed the building, their uniforms a stark contrast to the white-clad attendants. Papers were snatched from desks, locks forced open, doors flung wide. The silence of control was gone, replaced with the chaos of truth breaking in. I sat upright, my frail disguise falling away. For the first time that day I didn't have to pretend. I watched my children's faces as confidence slipped from them like melting wax. My son stepped forward quickly, raising his hands in protest. Wait. This is a misunderstanding, he insisted, his voice desperate but still polished as though rehearsing another role. It's for her comfort. She wanted this. My mother wanted this. But his words fell flat against the sirens still echoing outside, drowned out by the officers who pressed forward with evidence already in their hands. My lawyer must have worked faster than I had dared to hope. Bank transfers, one officer said sharply, holding up a file. Recorded phone calls. Arrangements made under false pretenses. Another officer's eyes met mine, softer, protective. Mrs. Linton, you're safe now. We've been monitoring since your message came through. Safe. The word felt different now, no longer a lie but a lifeline. My daughter shook her head rapidly, tears welling in her eyes, though I couldn't tell if they were genuine or just another performance. No, you don't understand. Mom agreed to this. She was suffering. We only wanted what was best for her. The officer's gaze hardened. You'll have the chance to explain that to a judge. For now, step aside. The attendants were lined up against the wall, their smiles gone, replaced by pale, trembling lips. One of them muttered, "We were just following instructions." But even they knew the weight of complicity. And my children, my flesh and blood, stood caught in the glare of truth, their excuses unraveling faster than they could speak them. Every word they had twisted for months, every lie they had sharpened into a knife for my back, collapsed under the weight of evidence my lawyer had already shared. I didn't need to argue. I didn't need to raise my voice. The walls themselves seemed to echo with the sound of their undoing. The very system they had trusted to erase me now stood against them, and I could only sit there, silent, watching. For once, silence was my strength. I saw my son's face crumple when an officer snapped handcuffs around his wrists. His eyes darted toward me, searching for the mother who had once forgiven every mistake, once soothed every wound. But the woman he remembered was gone. I had no words for him, only a steady gaze that told him he had finally run out of chances. My daughter reached out as though to touch me, tears streaking down her face. "Mom, please, you know I didn't mean." But her words dissolved into nothing as another officer guided her away. She kept looking back, searching for some flicker of softness in my eyes. All she found was steel. The sirens outside began to fade, no longer urgent but steady, a reminder of justice that had arrived just in time. The night air seeped into the building, cutting through the sterile suffocation. For the first time since the journey began, I felt I could breathe. I sat back against the pillows, my body trembling with release, not fear. I didn't need to scream, didn't need to plead or fight. The truth had spoken for me. The betrayal that might have ended my life had instead ended theirs. At least the lives they had planned, the empires of comfort and greed they thought they could build on my silence. One officer returned, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "You're safe now, Mrs. Linton. They won't hurt you again." I nodded, my throat too tight to form words. Safe. At last the word carried weight. Through the doorway I saw my children led into the night, their figures swallowed by flashing lights. Their empire of lies had collapsed, brick by brick, under the weight of their own greed. And I, the woman they thought would go quietly, sat alive, unbroken and silent, because silence was enough. For once the evidence screamed louder than I ever could. The days that followed blurred into one another, a strange mixture of exhaustion and disbelief. My children were no longer beside me, no longer able to whisper sweet lies into my ear. Instead they were locked away, waiting for the system they had mocked to turn its full attention on them. The newspapers called it a shocking case of elder abuse, one that revealed the hidden cruelties that can exist within families. But for me it was not a headline. It was my life. My children, my blood, sitting behind glass partitions, their eyes lowered when I entered the courtroom. I never imagined I would live long enough to see my son in a suit that was not for work or celebration but for defense, his tie askew as though even fabric refused to stay loyal to him. I never imagined my daughter would sit hunched beside him, her beauty dimmed by sleepless nights, her charms stripped bare in front of strangers who no longer cared for her performance. I used to dream of sitting at weddings, of watching them stand tall and proud in front of their own children. Instead, I sat in a cold courtroom, the echo of the judge's gavel reminding me that the stage they had chosen was no longer their own. The prosecutors spoke with a calm clarity that made my stomach turn. Every word was measured, every sentence sharp. Attempted fraud. Elder abuse. Conspiracy to commit homicide. Each charge struck like a stone thrown into the pool of my heart, sending ripples that collided with memories I had tried so hard to preserve. They read out the transfers of money, the appointments disguised as wellness retreats, the recordings of conversations where my children joked about inheritance as though my life was already over. I remembered the laughter at Sunday dinners, the way they had once teased me about being the bank of mom. Back then I had laughed too, brushing it off as careless humor, never believing that jokes can become blueprints when greed hardens the heart. How blind love can be, how deaf it makes you to warnings spoken in whispers. I told myself they were good children, that sacrifice would always be rewarded with loyalty. Now sitting in that courtroom I realized love can also be the blindfold that makes betrayal easier to deliver. My lawyer glanced at me often as if checking whether I was strong enough to sit through it all. But strength no longer felt like a choice. It was the only thing left to me. I listened to recordings of my son's voice, calm and deliberate as he assured strangers that she won't resist, she trusts us. I listened to my daughter's laughter when she said, "The old woman will think she's going to the beach." Strangers in the courtroom gasped at the cruelty, but I didn't. I had lived long enough to know that cruelty always begins quietly, in dismissals and jokes, in the way your hand is no longer held but managed. When the defense rose, their words were heavy with desperation. It was a misunderstanding, they claimed. They were concerned for her health. The money transfers were for legitimate expenses. The clinic was for her recovery. Lies stacked upon lies, fragile as paper towers. But paper cannot withstand fire, and the evidence burned through every attempt they made to paint themselves as children acting from love. The judge's eyes never softened, not once. When the verdict finally came, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Guilty on every charge. The word echoed like a hammer against steel, sharp and final. People looked toward me then, expecting relief, perhaps even triumph. But I felt neither. My chest tightened, not with victory but with something heavier. Justice had been served, but it did not feel sweet. It tasted of ash, of something scorched beyond repair. Because how does a mother celebrate the conviction of her own children? The law had validated my suffering, the gavel had struck down the empire of lies, but in doing so it also confirmed the truth I least wanted to face. My own blood had looked at my life and seen nothing but profit. I sat there, hands folded tightly in my lap, and felt the room tilt under the weight of that truth. For years I told myself that being needed was proof of being loved. That when they called for help, when they leaned on me, it was affection. But now I saw that every request, every sigh of gratitude, might have been another brick in the wall of entitlement they built around themselves. Even as the bailiffs led them away, I could not take my eyes off them. My daughter turned once, her face streaked with tears. My son did not look back at all. And I thought to myself, the court may have judged them, but my sentence began long before. It began the moment I realized that the people I carried in my body, the people I raised with devotion, had been rehearsing my end. Justice felt heavy because it came wrapped in grief. Grief not only for the years I almost lost but for the illusions that had already died. There would be no mending of these bonds, no family dinners where forgiveness softened the past. The guilty verdict had not only closed their case, it had closed the chapter of my life where I believed love alone was enough to protect me. When the courtroom emptied, I stayed behind for a moment. The echoes of footsteps faded, the wooden benches stood silent, and I let my hand trace the polished surface before me. Cold, smooth, unyielding. Justice had a surface like that, clear and final but offering no warmth. I walked out slowly, each step deliberate. Outside, the sun was setting, streaking the sky with fire. People paused to look at me, whispering my name, some with sympathy, some with admiration. But none of them knew the truth that pressed against my heart, that justice can punish betrayal, but it cannot restore what has been lost. And so I carried that weight with me, heavier than chains, heavier than handcuffs. A mother's verdict, one no gavel could ever soften. My own children had seen me not as a life to be cherished but as an asset to be erased. When the trial ended and the doors of the courthouse closed behind me, the world seemed quieter than before. The noise of arguments, the weight of evidence, the sound of the gavel, all of it had drained away, leaving only the rustle of leaves in the trees and the faint cry of birds overhead. People thought the story had ended there, with justice served and punishment delivered. But my story did not end in that courtroom. It continued in the silence of my home, in the solitude of my garden, in the choices I had made long before my children ever plotted against me. What no one knew, not the lawyers, not the prosecutors, not even my children themselves, was that their scheme had been doomed from the very start. Because years earlier, when the first cracks of doubt began to whisper in my mind, I had already rewritten my will. I never told them. Why would I? Suspicion is a quiet seed, and mine had been growing for some time. The offhand jokes about my money, the way they grew impatient whenever I spoke of simple joys rather than inheritances, the way they treated my age as a countdown rather than a continuation, all of it had told me something I refused to say out loud. They valued my legacy more than they valued me. So I acted silently, carefully. I visited my lawyer, a man who had known me since I was a young mother, still brimming with dreams of the future. Together, we rewrote the lines that determined where my life's work would go. No longer would it be a reward for blood alone. Instead, I chose to give most of it to causes that mattered, to shelters where elders could find safety when families abandoned them, to legal aid foundations that would give a voice to those who had been silenced by manipulation, to charities that reminded the forgotten that their lives still held dignity. I wanted my legacy not to feed greed but to starve it. And I had made another choice, one my children could never have predicted. Of all my children, only one had sat quietly watching the plan unfold with eyes full of conflict. He did not stop at no. Fear had bound him to silence. Loyalty to his siblings had tied his tongue. But silence is not the same as cruelty. He had not laughed at my expense. He had not plotted my death. And so, though I left him far less than he might have once expected, I left him something. A gesture, a seed of hope that perhaps one day he would find the courage his siblings never did. For the rest, there was nothing. Not a penny. Not a keepsake. Their elaborate plot had been for scraps they would never touch. They had gambled my life against their greed, and in return they received emptiness. I kept this knowledge to myself as the newspapers printed headlines, as neighbors knocked on my door offering condolences wrapped in admiration. They thought I was strong because I had survived. But strength, real strength, is not in surviving the storm. It is in deciding what to build after it passes. And I had already built something they could not destroy. The certainty that my life, my love, my years of labor, would not be squandered on those who saw me as disposable. In the evenings I sat in my garden, the place where my husband once planted roses with hands that smelled of soil and patience. The petals were fading with the season, but still they opened bravely toward the sun. I would sit there listening to the quiet hum of the world, and think about the strange gift betrayal had given me. Age had not made me helpless, it had given me clarity. The kind of clarity that strips away illusions and leaves only truth behind. I used to believe loyalty was owed simply because of blood. That motherhood was a contract written in sacrifice, and that no matter how frayed, the bond between mother and child could not be severed. But I see now that loyalty is not inherited, it is earned. And sometimes the greatest danger is not outside your home, but sitting at your own table, smiling across a meal you cooked. There is a bitter poetry in it, isn't there? That my children plotted for wealth that was never theirs, imagined futures built on the ashes of my absence, while the real treasure had already been promised elsewhere. They thought they were clever, weaving lies and rehearsing smiles, but I had been quietly writing a truth stronger than any deception, that I would not let my life's worth be measured in dollars handed to the undeserving. When I think of them now, I do not picture their faces in the courtroom, or their hands clutching one another as the verdict was read. I picture them years earlier, children with skinned knees and wide eyes, children who once reached for me with pure need, not greed. That memory aches, but it also reminds me that somewhere along the way they chose a different path. And I chose mine too. I chose to leave behind a legacy not of weakness, but of resistance. Not of blind love, but of clear-eyed truth. To the world it may seem like a twist, a clever turn in a tragic story. But to me it is closure. A will not just on paper but in spirit. The will to refuse exploitation, the will to define my own ending, the will to give my loyalty only to those who truly deserve it. So when people ask me if I feel bitter, if I feel broken, I smile faintly and shake my head. Well, betrayal is a wound, yes, but it can also be a teacher. And it has taught me the most important lesson of all, that age is not a cage but a crown. It carries with it the clarity to see who belongs at your table, and the strength to walk away from those who don't. In the quiet of my garden, surrounded by roses and fading light, I whisper to myself the truth I want the world to remember. Family can be love, but family can also be the greatest danger. And sometimes, the greatest act of love you can show yourself is to leave the unworthy behind.